Welcome to Outdoor Life and Liberty. I am your host, Michael. Really glad you could join us today. This is episode 12, being recorded on December 5th, 2024. I'm going to start out with a little bit of an apology. We normally try to roll these videos out more frequently, but we got into kind of a loop this last week where every day when we were preparing to go with the video, more news had happened that we thought was consequential. And then we thought we had where it would want. The next morning, more news had broke. It's just been one of those weeks. So we just went ahead and are going forward with this. I will say some of this is going to be a little off script because, as I said, news has broken even since I wrote my notes. So I'll forgive ahead of time. Also, coming up on the next episode, which is episode 13, we're going to have a gear review. I promise we'll be doing those semi regularly. We're going to talk a little bit about, especially for prepping, survival without rule of law, disaster type preparation of communications. And we're going to talk about one particular form of communication that works very well, although there are many different forms that could be made to fit the task at hand. But however, there's one that I have quite a bit of knowledge and expertise and experience with, and we're going to be talking about that, and then bringing in some other forms a little later. It'll be gear review of some Yaesu radio equipment, and then some alternatives that are a little more price friendly, and what the pluses and minuses are, and all that sort of thing. So, gear review is coming on the next episode, but for this episode, we got a lot of news to cover. Go everything from earthquakes, both physical and political, to crazy stuff going on with the CEO of United Health being assassinated in downtown New York. Fall from that to rhinos rearing their ugly heads again. So we're gonna dive right into it. As I said, when we get to the middle, we'll go a little off script. Also, if you're wondering, this hat that I'm wearing, it is a tricorn hat, but as you can see, it's camouflage. It's not a correct historical tricorn hat, though I do have those as well. But I actually acquired this while working in a large museum that is a colonial history museum in Virginia, where they do a lot of in costume things going about inside the museum's grounds. And one of the things that they do is a live fire musket range. And I was integral into getting that up and running. I was the range safety officer and the chief range safety officer, as well as the instructor that trained all the instructors. So believe it or not, they had us wear these for a little bit on the first year they were open, and you could have bought them in the store. They're kind of made of, it's not really plastic, but like a felt, artificial felt kind of material. And it's camouflage, which they thought was cool, but was really not historically appropriate. None of the instructors thought so, anyways. So, kind of an homage. Most of the guys who were issued these hats have, in one way or another, recorded them destroying them over the course of time because they hated them that much. But I kept mine. So, I think it'll serve well because I am a patriot and I like that time period. And it's camouflage, so it kind of meets my personality. Half my wardrobe is Cabela's camouflage, so it fits. Anyhow, we'll jump right in with some stuff that happened earlier in the week. So, South Korean President Yoon Sung Yeol on Tuesday declared martial law in an unannounced late night address broadcast on YTN television. Yoon said he had no choice but to resort to such a measure in order to safeguard free and constitutional order, saying opposition parties have taken hostage of the parliamentary process to throw the country into a crisis. Quote, I declare martial law to protect the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean communist forces, to eradicate the despicable pro North Korean anti state forces that are plundering the freedom and happiness of our people, and to protect the free constitutional order, Yoon said. He did not say in the address what specific measures will be taken. Yoon cited a motion by the country's opposition Democratic Party, which has a majority in parliament this week, to impeach some of the country's top prosecutors and its rejection of a governmental budget proposal. I got some thoughts on each of these, so I think that's rather interesting because according to the Constitution of South Korea, the way he went about declaring martial law and didn't follow the process, and it didn't really rise to the level that the Constitution permits, was actually unconstitutional in their own law. So, as a consummate politician, he violates their Constitution, he says, in order to safeguard free and constitutional order. Um, I'm not saying I approve of what the Democratic Party that is in the majority there are wanting to do, but you don't break the Constitution to do it. And he did. So, what has developed since then is the parliament voted almost immediately to deny that and say, no, there is not going to be any martial law declared. And now there's kind of a stalemate. Probably in the next day or two, we're going to hear that the president Yoon has been indicted or at least impeached. South Korea has a long history of throwing their politicians in jail when they're on the losing side of things. So, no, I'm not going to guess on what might happen there, but certainly makes me wonder. There's been some rumors that maybe he did that to draw attention to communism and socialism sneaking into his government in South Korea, which is kind of the line. Communism, you just cross that line into North Korea and you're in communist country, and right behind them's China. So it's understandable he'd be nervous about that, and we need to keep a close eye on that. We have, I don't know, about 40,000 troops that are stationed there. So what happens in South Korea matters. So this is disturbing, but we'll have to wait and see where that goes. But that was the news. Now from Newsmax, they had given some information. It says President-elect Donald Trump said there would be hell to pay in the Middle East if hostages held in the Gaza Strip were not released before his January 20th inauguration. Quote, everyone is talking about the hostages who are being held so violently, inhumanely, and against the will of the entire world in the Middle East. But it's all talk and no action, Trump wrote Monday in a Truth Social post. Quote, let this truth serve to represent that if the hostages are not released prior to January 20th, 2025, the date that I proudly assume office as President of the United States, there will be all hell to pay in the Middle East, and for those in charge who perpetrated these atrocities against humanity. Unquote. Those responsible will be hit harder than anybody has been hit in a long and storied history of the United States of America. Please release the hostages now. Um, which is typical Trump speak for release the hostages if you know what's good for you. The post came on the same day that Israeli Defense Forces confirmed that Commander Omar Maxim Nutria, 21, was killed during an Iran-backed Hamas terrorist attack back on October 7th, 2023, and his body was being held hostage in the Gaza Strip. Nutria, a New York native, served as a platoon tank commander for IDF's 7th Armored Brigade's 77th Battalion. Now, this is demonstrably a terrible, horrible, atrocious thing to do, but I will tread lightly here. The people in that part of the country who are in organizations like Hamas are terrible, horrible, deplorable, disgusting specimens of the higher ape family that we call humans, and actually might even be subhuman. Their treatment is just horrific. And you can't deal with these people in the ways that you would deal with the civilized world. And that's where a lot of, I think, policy in the past has come to grief, is that when you're dealing with inferior, somehow Darwin let that escape kind of level of human being, Darwinism failed and they're still breathing and breeding and all that sort of thing. You can't deal with them in the same way that you would deal with a civilized nation, or even one that applied any form of logic or had any semblance of ethics at all, which the Hamas folks do not. So it's not surprising that they would hold a dead body as a hostage. As disgusting as that is, the way to do that's eradicate them. I mean, I would just kill every last one of them and call it done, and then we wouldn't have to worry about that anymore. And there's really not another great way that will work to eliminate that evil from the face of the earth. So, not surprising, but it is disgusting. Now, the United States and Japan will take part in a 3-day joint military exercise with South Korea from November 13th. Military officials announced after North Korea launched an intercontinental, I think they meant December 13th, since November 13th was last month. But North Korea, they did this shortly after North Korea launched an intercontinental ballistic missile and allegedly ratified a major defense pact with Russia, which has been confirmed since they have, 12 or 1,000 or so Korean military, North Korea soldiers now in Russia, which is about 3 or 4 days worth of attrition at the rate Russians have been losing people. I think the war should go on because, gosh, pretty soon there won't be anybody left in Russia, and we can just walk in and claim a whole lot of land. However, a lot of people are thinking the Ukrainians are putting up a very valiant fight. They are putting up a very valiant fight, but let's be honest, it's a matter of time. It's a game of numbers. Russia hit several of their power plants recently, knowing that they're coming into winter. Um, Russia's in a bit of a bind with Trump coming in. That was a wrinkle that I don't think they easily foresaw. And now they're trying to gain as much land and win as many battles as they can as a bargaining chip for once Trump is in office. But anyways, this operation will be in Korea. South Korea will be known as Freedom's Edge, and it's a joint exercise will feature South Korean and Japanese fighter jets and maritime patrol aircraft, as well as the USS George Washington, USS Higgins, USS McCampbell, USS Dewey, which have F-35, F-18, P-8, and KC-135 aircraft. So that's just kind of helping with the posturing on what's going on there. But of course, what's happening now with the coup in the government and the declaring a martial law and all that crazy stuff we were just talking about. I don't know what the actual strategic value that would have had at this point then, because the president kind of played his hand and lost. So, anyways, that's not uncommon for us to do defense exercises with other countries where we have an interest, like 40,000, American soldiers stationed, and it's very common. Although North Korea always raises the alarm bells and rattles their sabers and threatens, you guys are too close, and there'll be consequences, and etc. It'll be interesting now that the government is a bit destabilized in South Korea to see what Kim Jong-un does in North Korea, because right now things in South Korea are not very stable. Now I'm going to talk for a moment about I'm going to be talking in my uncommon sense here a little bit about Pete Hegseth. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the rhinos that are becoming involved now. So your typical rhinos, which we know would include Murkowski and Collins and Mitch McConnell for senators. These are people that, I don't know if they're just deaf or if they're just stupid or maybe both. What is it? I think it was Samuel Clemens that had a little quote where he said, "If I were in Congress, or if I were an idiot, but I repeat myself." That's kind of what we got going on here. But with McConnell and Murkowski and Collins, uh, people who live in those states, which is what Alaska and Collins, I think, is Maine, and wherever McConnell's from. I mean, listen, guys, if they don't get behind the agenda that the mass majority of Americans, by both mandate, by winning the Electoral College, and mandated by winning the popular vote, 77 million plus people voting for Donald Trump, isn't a clear enough signal that you need to follow his agenda, then you need to have your asses primaried right the hell out of your jobs and right the hell out of the office. And if people in Maine and people in Alaska and wherever Mitch McConnell's from, because I dislike him so much, I don't even know where he's from. He's a puff face old dude that should have been gone a long time ago. But they need to not have jobs anymore. You don't want to be part of the problem. Your states don't want to be the ones sponsoring part of the big problem to this new America we have coming. So my recommendation would be primary them the hell out of office and be done with it, because these are worthless, terrible, feckless people without backbone or moral scruples whatsoever. They're just there for their paycheck. That's what they want to hold on to, power and money. Anyways, those rhinos, Republicans in name only, need to be primaried and removed. When they got rid of Matt Gaetz, I mean, I guess he had a lot of stuff going on. He, removed himself from Congress. He resigned. Uh, a lot of questionable things going on there. There were current investigations going on, et cetera. But with Mr. Hegseth, the attacks are digging up stuff from his past. It's from his first marriage. I think he's on marriage number three. I could be wrong, but I believe it's his third marriage. Yeah, the guy's not perfect. Um, However, he is a warrior who did fight and still fights hard for the United States of America, and he would do an excellent job cleaning up the Department of Defense. So support him or not, um, you know, he's saying that all that is in the past. They haven't been able to dig up anything. In fact, all these anonymous sources that are coming out saying there's these other problems, you should disregard anonymous sources just automatically, out of hand. If they're not willing to put their name on it, it's not worthy of your consideration. So until they start naming names of who's accusing him of what, other than the agreement that he signed, which is not untypical with the non-disclosure agreement, men all over the place have had to sign those, as have women. And his first marriage, him making some large mistakes, which was, many years ago. He's 44 now. It should not be something that qualifies you or disqualifies you to be the DOD. In fact, the guy who's the current director of the DOD is an idiot. He's utterly unqualified. He's a babbling idiot. The only time that he sounds like a fool is when his mouth open and he speaks. I mean, he's literally just terrible, and he's utterly unqualified to be there, and yet he is. So you rhinos better get on board if you want to keep your power and your job and do what the people have told you to do, or it's time to tell you goodbye and you need to go. Talking about Pete Hegseth a little bit, there's been a lot of controversy about some things that Pete has said, and I want to clarify some of this stuff for you. So it's amazing how controversial common sense is these days, and that's why my section here is called Uncommon Sense. Look at the reaction to Pete Hegseth's comments about women in combat roles. President-elect Donald Trump wants Hegseth to be a Secretary of Defense. He served in the Army National Guard, deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan. He's talked repeatedly about the problems he sees in today's woke military. Quote, "We should not have women in combat roles," unquote, Hegseth said on a podcast in November. He continued, "It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated." Well, that wasn't a popular opinion with the propaganda press, and certainly those on the left and the lamestream media. For instance, NBC News said Pete Hegseth's remarks about women in combat are met with disgust and dissent. Um, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who's that guy I was just telling you about, right? The current Secretary of Defense, who's an idiot. He's utterly unqualified to open his mouth and say anything about it. Gave an impassioned defense of women in combat. What a shocker that the woke military establishment wants women in combat. But here's why Pete Hegseth is correct. First, it's important to define terms. Hegseth isn't saying women shouldn't be in the military or even that they shouldn't be in combat. In the modern battlefield, even cooks and IT specialists and mechanics may need to start shooting when their base is being invaded or overrun or when they're deploying to repair something in the field. They're not frontline soldiers, but if you're in the military, you know how to use a gun and you're expected to kill the enemies of the country, no matter what your role. He's not saying women are not suited for that. Many women have performed valiantly under fire. Hegseth is referring to certain physically demanding jobs, such as infantry, um, cavalry, which is the armored cavalry and air cavalry, and special operations type of things, Navy SEALs, if you will, and Rangers. That's what he's referring to. Uh, this issue is actually part of a larger debate, and it's whether the differences between men and women are innate or socially imposed. Um, the new women revealed by the scientific data is as strong, strategic, and smart as anyone else, states the blurb for a book entitled Inferior: How Science Got Women Wrong and the New Research That's Rewriting the Story. And many people agree. Among those who see differences between men and women, there is little agreement about whether these differences are mostly based on biology or on social expectations, Pew Research reported in October. So, if the differences between men and women were imposed by society, it would be much less concerning to have women in combat roles. They aren't. Just look at how mediocre male athletes dominate women's sporting events. So, in other words, it's biology, folks. Males, through evolution or by creation, whatever you believe, are the things that are supposed to go out and kill and to protect and to hunt and go to war. That is the role males were developed to do. Women were developed to nurture and to educate. And yes, if somebody invades the camp, to pick up a spear and defend. We're not saying they can't fight, but their endurance, their body strength, their capability for sustained deployment, well, all heavily dehydrated or wounded or needing to spend a long time in the brush without access to hygiene, can be very problematic for female soldiers for obvious reasons. They have a monthly occurrence that requires special care and detail, things like tampons or pads. There has to be hygiene available, or rapidly that situation gets really terrible. And that's just a fact because you're female. There's nothing about it. You're not going to have the upper body strength a male is. You're not going to be able to pick up a 180-pound male, throw him over your shoulder, and run him a mile and a half back to safety on the lines when they're wounded. They're just not able to. That's just a fact. So if let's look at how mediocre male athletes dominate women's sporting events, right? So that's been in the news too a lot, but people just, especially the Democrats, they don't like to connect things that are connected. So basically, men participating in women's sports because they say they're a woman, even if they're an average athlete, not anywhere near like the varsity team, they are blowing all of the records from the top women athletes in all of those various fields, swimming being one that has come to the limelight quite a bit. Weightlifting, for example. I mean, the weightlifting, normally when the new record is beat, it's beaten by ounces or a pound or something like that. The men now participating in ladies' weightlifting competitions are crushing it by double digits to triple digits numbers in weight. And these are mediocre guys, and they're competing there because if they were competing against men who were actually good at those sports, they'd be middle of the pack at best or worse. That's just a fact. So that same thing applies, since that is true, applies to military operations. So the Army's combat fitness test, which consists of 6 events, the Army originally wanted it to be sex neutral, but too many women failed, so the Army instituted lower scores for women. For instance, an 18-year-old man has to deadlift 340 pounds 3 times. For an 18-year-old woman, it's 210 pounds. So in other words, they set these standards that what it is that to be the best killing machines, the highest level of lethality and effectiveness in our armed services, what strength is required, they lowered so women could step into those roles, which means they're not as strong and cannot do it as well. That's just a fact. I mean, the Army admitted they changed their own um, physical test. The physical strength differences matter in combat. In 2025, the Marine Corps put out a study comparing male squads with mixed sex squads. The all male teams were faster on 69% of the tasks. The squads with women were faster on 1.5% of the tasks. The all male squads were faster than the gender integrated squads in each tactical movement, it is found. Also, women were more than twice as likely to suffer a musculoskeletal injury during this trial run than were the men, and their endurance was generally found to be about half. So here we go. The Marine Corps said, let's look at this. They were the only branch service with the balls to do this. And they said, let's do this. We'll put men and women in randomly selected in certain squads, and all men randomly selected in certain squads and have them compete down the line. And on average, 69.8, you can say that the all male teams were 70% more effective than teams where it was mixed with men and women on the team. So that was a rather large study, and it was done over a fairly long period of time. The numbers are statistically relevant and pertinent, and they validate their statistics. So that's just the fact. And I think anybody who has a little common sense understands that. So you're not going to have, well, you see the result. I mean, you shouldn't have. I was just getting ready to say you're not going to have, except we saw it in the Olympics this last year. Excuse me, where a male went into a female boxing. That is a really good replication of what happens in combat, especially close quarters combat. And I think she took two punches, or was it three, and then surrendered, yielded, forfeited the match to the guy. She said she'd never been hit so hard in her life. It hurt so bad. She was struggling to keep conscious. And this guy was, by all accounts, a really not very good boxer when he was boxing against men. So certainly not a contender and certainly not a champion. And he basically beat the hell out of the woman in the same weight category very quickly. I think they said two or three punches in. So this is just the facts. I'm not saying what that means. I'm saying it's a fact. So since our military's primary job is to take lethality to the enemies of the United States of America, killing our enemies, let's just be blunt. That's what they're paid to do. They're paid to be put kinetic energy or hand-to-hand combat on the enemies and neutralize them, which means kill them. And men are just better at that than women. There's just no doubt. Now, that doesn't mean there's the exceptional woman from time to time who would pop up that can do things at a much higher level. But we're talking about averages here because we're talking about numbers of volunteers, tens of thousands of soldiers, and it's just not comparable. Um, and so it goes on with what I'm in my notes here, which kind of what I was just saying. A handful of exceptional women can likely meet the minimum physical standards for these demanding combat roles. But the military still shouldn't allow them in. For one, if sex neutral standards produce few qualified women, leftists will push to lower those standards. It's already happened in the Army's Ranger training. They've lowered their standards, which is why Ranger to me used to be like a really big deal. Now it's like, well, okay, a little more training because their standards have been so watered down so they can put more women in the ranks that it's really almost you know, yeah, it's extra PT training basically. And more fundamentally, men act differently when there's a woman in the group. This is especially true when the men are 18 to 24, full of testosterone, and the woman is attractive and physically fit. Romantic relationships inside a unit are a distraction that hurts morale and cohesion. Um, And there's other things too. Men are more concerned with how it appears they are functioning versus how they're really functioning when there's a woman in the mix. That's just basic biology. And so it introduces psychological situations as well that undermine unit efficiency and lethality. The military, as some folks scream, wasn't this kind of discrimination against women. Again, it's not discrimination against women. Women can be in the military, but they just can't meet the standards to be frontline combat, is the point. And the only way they can is if we lower the standards, which of course we shouldn't do. But the military routinely discriminates in ways society wouldn't tolerate in other jobs, by the way. If you're too old, if you're too fat, if you're too slow, they kick you out. That wouldn't work if you were working at the local office. If you were a salesperson and they say, "Well, you're just too fat, we're firing you." That's a lawsuit that violates all kinds of federal employment laws. But it's absolutely permitted in the military, and in fact, encouraged and should be in the military because their job isn't equity. Their job isn't to be non-discriminatory. Their job is to put together the most lethal combination of people in the field that kill the enemies of the United States. Period. And performance is all that matters. So if women can't lift the weight, can't run as far, are more susceptible to injuries, and have recurring monthly activities or monthly cycles that cause a really big reduction in their combat efficiency. I mean, there's many things you can do, but frontline combat, especially in specialized operations units and the like, aren't one of them. They're just not. So, that's just that. So what I was saying, that their ability to kick you out if you're old or fat or slow is permitted and even encouraged, because the military needs to prioritize its ability to kill people and break things, and that's what they're about. Having women serve in combat roles makes the military less lethal. Therefore, I argued that women shouldn't serve in those frontline combat roles. That's just uncommon sense as far as I'm concerned. But anyhow, so we're going to move along now. I mentioned what our review is going to be next week. We did get some requests to review specific firearms and systems. Someone was asking, let's see, you got it here. It says good. What to look for in a good designated marksman rifle, and should that be included in a survival setup? Well, I'm going to say yes, it should be included in a survival setup, but I'm going to make that a very big caveat. So when you're not in law enforcement and you're not in the military, basically in most states, but I'm talking now primarily from the state I'm currently in, which is Ohio, is basically yes, you can use lethal force to defend yourself. And the three things in a nutshell that have to be, and we'll do a whole show on this, by the way, coming up: lethality and use of force, what to do if you're caught up in a situation where you do have to neutralize the threat. And we'll go over some of the legalities with that. But in a nutshell, there's three elements that have to be present to make that, justifiable or excusable homicide. And that is ability, opportunity, and jeopardy. It's the AOJ triad. And so where you could get into trouble theoretically with a DMR or sniper rifle is that jeopardy part, and maybe even opportunity. So do they have an ability to kill you? Well, if they're holding a pocket knife, or if they've got an awl, awls can do terrible damage, an axe, a gun, a chain, or they're just really, really big, so they're physically very likely to be able to do serious physical harm or death to you. Then they have the ability, but the question generally arises in opportunity and certainly in jeopardy. So if that person with a switchblade knife who's waving it around and saying, "I'm going to kill you," is standing on the other side of the Grand Canyon, do they have an opportunity to kill you? And the answer is no, because you're not going to throw a knife and be lethal across the Grand Canyon. So just the fact that they have a weapon even does not necessarily meet the requirements of a lawful self-defense claim, which is an affirmative defense. So it's going to be either an excusable or a justifiable homicide that you're committing, but you're saying it's excusable or justifiable because this AOJ triad was present. And it's that last one, the jeopardy. You can kind of think of that in a nutshell as the person has to kind of be in the act of killing you. In other words, you are in jeopardy if you don't act and use force, up to and including lethal force, to stop that person's immediate action right then. And they're not saying in the future, or in a few minutes. They're saying right then. So think of it as, unless they're in the act of like going to try to kill you, you're really not in jeopardy. So again, that kind of same scenario applies. So if a guy is walking through the woods with a machete and he's telling you he's going to kill you, and he's 250 yards away, would you be good with shooting him? The answer is an absolute no. You're in no jeopardy whatsoever. He could be an Olympic athlete. He's not going to throw that machete 200 yards and effectively hit you with it. So that jeopardy thing comes to bite you in the ass. So if somebody breaks in your house, kicks in your door, they have a pistol in their hand or a knife or an ice pick, and you draw your handgun or your home defensive shotgun or your home defensive carbine rifle, be it rifle carbine, which is my preference, or pistol caliber carbine, to defend yourself within your house, that's good because you're within your house. So they kick in your door. That's kind of your castle. In Ohio, we have castle doctrine and stand your ground. Um, so you're good to go. But the designated marksman rifle is designed to extend the range of your standard combat assault arm. And so whatever the assault gun. That's not even a term really, but a gun designed for military assaulting. So like an M4 carbine is an example. Those are designed to reach out to be effective. You can hear all kinds of big numbers, but in reality, um, they're effective out to about 300 meters. So not because then aiming becomes an issue as well as lethality of the 5.56 round. I'm starting to fall off there. But the DMR, the designated marksman rifle, will have an optic on it and usually in a heavier caliber so that you can extend that out to maybe 4, 5, 600 yards. Sniper rifles can certainly cover that same gap too, but they can keep going. You hear about these world record shots, but lots of times, you know, 5, 6, 7, 800 yards is pretty common. But by putting that scope on there and stuff, and you're able to project that out a little further range wise, sounds like an advantage. And it can be if you're hunting, if we're talking survival and you need a gun that you can defend yourself with and hunt with. Yeah, DMR kind of makes sense because you might not be able to stalk so close that you're in a regular range. You may have to take a shot at 3 or 400 yards. And with an optic that's higher magnification than the optics you have on your close quarters combat gun, you're going to increase your chance of bringing meat home for the table. That is true. But again, if you're looking through that scope, and that guy has, a knife or even say like a pistol. Let's say he's got a Glock in his hand and you shoot him at 450 yards with your rifle and claim self-defense, you're going to jail, son. It's just there's no way that's going to fly in any court. So that's why I'm saying it can be something good to have in your staple of guns. It might not be a great idea. It really depends. That Top Gun you see of mine on the shelf back there, that's a DMR setup thing. It's got a 1 to 10 scope on it, and it's in a caliber that's heavier than 5.56. That one happens to be 6.5 Grendel. It'll carry more energy and it'll carry it out that many yards with lethality. But again, you've got to take it. Now, if that person's out at 400, 300, 400, 450 yards and he's aiming a scoped rifle at you or a long gun and you can't tell what it is, but it's a long gun aiming at you, then that's different. And that's what I'm saying. It becomes really iffy. So you need to think that over really well because if all he's got is a knife or a handgun that doesn't have an 8-inch barrel and a scope on it, I mean, if he's pulling out a Glock 19, at 380 yards, you might be in a little bit of danger, but you're not in a great deal of danger, um, from being hit. So it becomes iffy if you're going to meet that requirement for opportunity and meet that requirement for jeopardy in that triad. So, but it might. That's a case by case basis, but it's certainly more questionable. So, yes, I think the answer is there is a place for a designated marksman rifle in your stable if you've got the money to get an extra gun. But you need to be really well educated and trained and think about the scenarios prior to using it because we're going to talk about other specialty guns as we go. This one in the middle right here, that's my area suppressant gun. So as a '07 firearms manufacturer with an SOT, I can manufacture weapons up to and including machine guns, and that is a machine gun. That's a fully automatic machine gun and it's only got a 3 powered scope on it because basically its role is area suppression, area denial, suppressing fire and trying to maybe stopping a vehicle from coming up a road, kind of denying them access to an area. But it's not super accurate, so I don't really need more than a 3 power scope on that because it's not designed, even though it's a 20-inch barrel gun, it's not designed to shoot that far in its role. Um, so we're going to go now to our humor section, which I try to throw in on every single episode because some of the stuff we talk about is pretty heavy. Oh, one other thing that was updated. If you watch today, they had a 7.0 earthquake off the coast of California. It was kind of at the California Oregon um, line there out in the ocean. I don't know. On the map, it was hard to tell, but a ways out on the plate. So, 30, 60, 100 miles offshore or whatever. But it was a 7.0. And then it has some smaller earthquakes that are following that, which is normal. When you have an earthquake, you'll have the smaller ones that kind of cluster with it. But it issued a tsunami warning, which lasted about an hour, and then the buoy measurements and things they were getting indicated there wasn't a big tsunami wave coming, so they canceled that. But just goes to show you when we're talking about prepping for terrible things, just that quick. There was an earthquake, and they're telling people within an hour you could have a 20-foot wall of water crashing in on you, and then it ends up, thank goodness, that it wasn't the case. But that's why we believe that prepping for a survival situation and having training and knowledge and the technology to do so is really important. So, as far as the humor goes, we're going to talk a little bit about, if you've not heard, Kash Patel is been suggested and put forth as President Trump's pick for the FBI director, which I think he'd be awesome. But this is kind of done in regards to that, our news flash here. So, Kash Patel is now the presumptive head of the FBI and is planning on some big changes. Here are just a few of the most incredible. The 10 drastic changes coming to the Bureau include: one, all FBI agents must go back to wearing trench coats, carrying snub-nosed revolvers, and saying "see" after every statement. Presentation matters, see? That's going right back to J. Edgar Hoover, isn't it? Two, cancel all current plans to assassinate cancel all current plans to assassinate Donald Trump, but cool trench coats first. Number three, all of Melania's underwear recovered during the Mar-a-Lago raid must be returned. You've had it long enough. Number four, from now on, all agents must submit a written request before grooming a mass shooter. Finally, a return to common sense makes MK Ultra policies. Yay. Five, X files are to be reopened. Agents therein now report directly to the president. Number six, new applicants must weigh under 400 pounds. This is a step in the right direction for fitness requirements. Number seven, the chief officer of quadriplegic black lesbian representation will be fired. No severance package. Sorry. Remove all 850 wiretaps at Mar-a-Lago. It's a waste of resources since Trump publicly shares anything on Truth Social, anyways. Number nine, agents are now required to arrest pedophiles. This is new cutting edge idea in criminal justice. And number 10, no more work retreats at Epstein Island. Kash Patel is such a party pooper. It really looks like Kash Patel will get the Bureau back in shape. What other changes are you hoping he brings to the Bureau? Let us know at our email, which is outdoorlifeandliberty@gmail.com. That's also where you can leave any questions, suggestions, critiques, things that you liked, things that you didn't like, things you'd like to see us do in the future. We do have a couple of guests that'll be coming up uh, on the screen here in the next 2 to 3 episodes, so stay tuned for that. But we'll be doing a gear review on communications equipment next time, and any other ideas that you'd like to throw in there, we'll certainly entertain and try to get to. So again, that is outdoorlifeandliberty@gmail.com. And that's going to wrap it for today's episode 12 of Outdoor Life and Liberty. I am Michael. I am your host. I look forward to seeing you here in a couple more days where we can continue talking about outdoor life and pursuits and liberty. Thank you and have a good night.